A glimpse of British royalty. Visit Westminster Abbey, Big Ben, and see the fabulous crown jewels at the Tower of London. You'll admire the Roman baths and many more of England's historic sites. You'll be awestruck by the intriguing prehistoric monument of Stonehenge. Then on to Scotland and the bonny banks of Loch Lomond and to Wales. After that, you'll return to London for your flight home. This vacation of a lifetime includes professional tour director, local guides, and 12 meals courtesy of Globus and Lewis Travel Service of Fresno. Enter now to win this fabulous prize in the Paradise Found sweepstakes from Valley Public Television. Send your entry in today. Join host John Crancer for the Valley's only primetime video magazine show featuring the people and events that make Central California unique. Don't miss San Joaquin Illustrated, Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. and Saturdays at 5:30 p.m. on Valley Public Television, Channel 18.
Welcome to Sewing with Nancy, TV's how-to sewing program with your host, Nancy Zieman.
Thank you for joining me. This is our second program of our series entitled Sew an Heirloom. In this series, I'm showing you how to work with delicate laces and trims and specialty stitches at your machine. Today, I'm going to be working with the double needle to show you creative effects. And there are 5 sizes of double needles to choose from the very narrow double stitching to the very wide. For heirloom sewing, you might guess, we're going to be working with the narrow stitching. The 1.6 size needle, the 2.0, or the 3.0 needles are the ones I'd recommend. The sizing refers to the distance between the needles in millimeters. To create pin tucks, we're going to use the small needles and batiste fabric, as we've done on this nightgown fabric. You can see a combination of laces and trims, as well as the vertical rows of pin tucks that are so delicate and add a nice heirloom effect. At the sewing machine, I'll show you how to set up for pin tucking and using the specialty feet. I have a machine set up for pin tuck sewing. I'd like to give you the details. First of all, I'm working with 2 threads. 2 needles, 2 threads is what is needed. And rather than buying 2 spools of thread, you can simply wind a second bobbin and use that as your second spool. When winding these threads through the machine and you reach the tension disc, place one thread to the left of the disc and the other thread to the right, and that will make for even threading and feeding of this thread as you're sewing. The foot area requires a special pin tuck foot. Check your accessory box for this foot, or you may have to buy one separately. They have grooves on the back side or the bottom of the feet, either 5, 7, or 9 grooves. The 5 and 7 are the most popular. These grooves give channels for the previously sewn rows of pin tucks to be placed. And it will make for equidistant or equal spacing of these delicate sewing areas. On my machine, I have a 5-groove pin tuck foot, and I'm using a double needle size 2.0. That means the distance between the needles, and these needles are small sizes. They automatically come size 70 needles. We're just about ready to sew. I have this extra little plastic gizmo that fits into the machine area. It raises the pin tuck. If you have one of these, attach it to your machine. So the machine is ready to sew for pin tucks. The fabric needs a little preparation. Remember, we're sewing strips of fabric together with laces and trims, as we did in our first program of this series. And to have straight strips of fabric and straight stitching is very important. So I have drawn a thread, just pulled one thread in the area where I'm going to be pin tucking, and this is where I'm going to sew my first row pin tucks. This drawn thread will give me just a little indication of where to stitch the pin tuck on the batiste fabric. Now, if you'd like to, you could cut it with a rotary cutter and mark the placement. This is just one alternative. We have 2 needles, 1 bobbin, and usually when sewing pin tucks, I like to sew a little bit slower because that bobbin has to accommodate both needles, creating a kind of a zigzag look on the back side. Simple to sew. It's basically the machine setup that takes a little sewing know-how. Then after you've sewn one row of pin tucking, again, it's very straight down the edge, then put the pin tuck foot, align the pin tuck foot in the previously sewn pin tuck. And I'm going to put it in the last groove on the left side. And now this next row will be very straight, or equidistant from the first row. If I'd like the pin tucks closer together, all I'd have to simply do was to start the pin tuck at a closer groove to the needle. And to create heirloom sewing effects of pin tucks, that's all there's to it. We have a couple other variations to make your sewing a little bit simpler, and one of them is to do a continuous sewing of pin tucks called pin tucks in the round. If you're going to be doing a lot of pin tuck area, let's say on a collar or cuff or even down a blouse front, and rather than sewing maybe 20 rows of pin tucks, you can just keep sewing without cutting your threads only at the end. This requires just a little bit of preparation in the beginning. On my fabric, I have marked with a line the starting or the first row of pin tucks. I've marked it 1 inch from the edge, and I've used a very fine quilting pencil that gives me a non-oily base. Many times with heirloom sewing, I avoid using the washable marking pens because sometimes after years those pen marks could appear as a gray area. So that's why I use a quilting pencil in this instance. And I have a very faint line marked all the way down, just 1 inch from the edge. The only other marking needed is the starting point of the second row, marked 1/4 of an inch from the first. This is called pin tucks in the round because I'm going to meet the ending row or ending mark of the first row to the second row starting point. All this means is that this seam is going to be offset by 1/4 of an inch. And sew the seam, making it a round tube. Now, I'd like to note right now is that make certain that your fabric is long enough. I do cut it a few inches longer because I'm going to cut off the seam when I'm done sewing in the round. But make sure it's big enough to fit around the free arm area of your sewing machine so that this fabric can fit around so you can sew in a circle, that it isn't too short. Most of the time you will not have that problem at all. You'll be working with a larger piece of fabric. On this next sample, I have the seam sewn and I'm ready to stitch in the round. And I always like to draw my threads to the back because I have 3 threads instead of working with 2. And I'm going to sew, placing the majority of the fabric to the right of my presser foot. I'm going to start to sew at the mark furthest, my long mark, as you can see a faint line marked in this area. And just sew. Again, we're working on batiste fabric for heirloom sewing. 100% cotton or blends of fabric. It's delicate. That's why you get this delicate stitching. Now, as I'm reaching my starting spot, notice that the first row is offset. And then my foot simply guides right into the first row stitching, and I can sew the subsequent rows. It's easier to do this at home. I'll just get this guided back into the groove. There we go. And we'll just keep on sewing in the round. Just guide this. As you can see, it's kind of fast. And as I am reaching the end of the number, then I would simply start the third row, and it automatically starts by itself. Now, after sewing around and around as many times as I would need, I would simply just remove this from the presser foot area of the sewing machine and then cut the fabric apart wherever needed. And then I would have this to sew into my garment. Just kind of a fun way of working with it. The third type of pin tucks that I'd like to show you is a corded pin tuck, adding a cording on the back side to give the pin tucks a little bit more substance. And it gives more of a raised effect. If you'd like to have a color added, as I had it here, I added a bright pink on the back side, gave it a shadow effect. The choice is yours, whether to use a contrasting or coordinating color. For ease of showing you, I'm going to show you with the contrasting color, and I'm going to be using pearl cotton, or you could use top stitching thread, something heavy, and place a needle threader in the extra hole in the front of the template of your machine, and insert the cording in that eye and bring it through. Now I leave this pearl cotton rather floating free in the area of my machine, and I do not close the area of the bobbin area, and now it's just like sewing a regular pin tuck, with the exception being is that cording will automatically feed from the underneath side and get caught in the zigzag stitch. This will give a more defined pin tuck. It may look just about the same, but you can see it's a little bit firmer. And the back side is where the cording is placed. So depending upon the type of pin tucking you would like, either pin tucking in the round or pin tucks that have been just sewn on the batiste fabric or corded, they make lovely heirloom effects that you can create at your machine. Here's another way of using the double needle when working with heirloom sewing. I like to call it double needle shadow stitching. The center of this pillow, the design was created with the use of double needle as well as a single needle stitching. But look closely at the bow area. The blue thread from the back side shadows through. This is because we used a double needle and a specialty thread in the bobbin. My machine is set up just as before with 2 threads at the top, and we're using little darker threads this time because it's used as an accent stitches. And notice that I don't have a foot on my machine. In the presser foot area, there isn't a foot. We remove that and also drop the feed dogs. On a few machines, there's a cover to place over this, but most of your machines will have to drop the feed dogs, lower them. So we're not going to be using the foot, but using a hoop and fabric. The specialty thread that we used, or that I mentioned in the bobbin, is a serger thread. It's the woolly nylon, the texturized thread. Since this thread is texturized, it will give a wider coverage on the bottom, and then this color will shadow through to the front side. If you're not a serger owner, find a friend who has a spool of this and wind a couple of bobbins, and then you'll be able to do this stitching. The key, too, is to use bright colors so that you'll get some shadowing through the lighter shades. The needle that I'm using on my machine is a medium-sized double needle. I showed you these 5 different needles earlier. We used the 2 smaller sizes for the pin tucks. Now I'm going to use the size 3.0. That means 3 millimeters between the needles for the shadow stitching. This will give me more of a shadow effect because the needle distance is greater. On the fabric, I'm working with batiste again, fine quality fabric, either a blend or 100% cotton. I've outlined my design. We'll give a design like this for you in the booklet that accompanies this series. Generally, I would highly recommend that you use a quilting pencil that's oil-free, but the mark that it gives is very light. And it's good enough for you to see at home, but for you to see on television, we've highlighted it with a darker pen. This obviously would not work out well for heirloom sewing, but it will work out well for today. Then we're going to put this fabric, which I backed with fabric or paper so you could see more clearly, put this in a hoop. A wooden embroidery hoop is what I like to use right now. Placing the larger hoop on your tabletop, the fabric on top of the larger hoop, and then snapping the smaller hoop inside. And I made certain that the smaller hoop was just fitting into the larger hoop. I didn't have it loose at all, so I had have a nice tight surface. Then to get it a little bit tighter, you can give that inner hoop just a little push, about 1/8 of an inch all the way around, and this will really secure the fabric in the hoop, making it nice and taut. And if you'd like, use a screwdriver or your strong hands to tighten this even more if you can. Now I'm going to place the hoop underneath the presser foot area, and I say area because obviously we do not have a presser foot on the machine right now. And I'm going to draw up the bobbin thread by turning the flywheel 1 stitch and then pulling up the bobbin thread. Now we're going to take a couple of stitches, but before we do this, the most important part about working with this is to place the presser bar in the lowered position. If we left it in this raised position and stitched, we'd end up with a wad of thread on the back side. Make sure it's in the lowered position. It's hard to tell because we don't have a foot here, but just remember to do that. Then sew 2 or 3 stitches to lock the threads and cut off the extra thread tails. Now we're going to sew around this area by guiding the presser foot, or guiding the fabric in the hoop underneath the presser foot area. You're not going to turn the hoop like you're driving a car, but rather move it up or down, left or right, to the side, but always keeping your hands, I like to say, in the 3 o'clock and the 9 o'clock position, as on a clock. And sew at a relatively fast speed, moving the hoop somewhat slowly, following around the penciled area. Now, it's going to look a little bit deceiving on this one because of the dark lines, but sometimes you'll get a wide stitch, sometimes a narrow stitch, depending upon the way that you're stitching, and just sew around this area. And take it easy as you're sewing, and just keep on sewing the entire area that you need stitched with a double needle. And I'll show you on a finished sample. We're going to sew a little bit more on this sample in just a few minutes. But I'd like to show you the shadow effect. On this finished sample in the navy area, we have a shadowed through area because, again, on the back side, that woolly nylon shadows through. It gives a texturized area. So that's the key of making this work. The next step that we're going to work with is doing the straight stitching around the edge of this design. Off camera, I finished stitching around the bow area, and now I'd like to add a highlight area around the center, just using a straight stitch. I've changed my machine to placing in a size 90 needle, a rather large needle for delicate sewing, but this is so the thread doesn't fray as easily. And I've changed the bobbin thread too, to a normal thread. I still have my presser foot removed, the feed dogs lowered, and I'm simply going to draw up the bobbin thread. And again, take a couple of stitches to lock the threads. And I've lowered the presser bar area. And we'll just cut out these extra thread tails. Now with a straight stitch, you have more freedom to move this hoop. And when working with a straight stitch highlight, I'm just going to add a couple of leaves to go around here. You can just kind of move the hoop in any way that you'd like. Again, you'll have a much finer line. You will not have this dark line to guide. And just kind of stitch around the area. This is why it's called free motion, because you have the ability to kind of paint at your sewing machine with thread. And here we're adding, as paint, we're using thread and making little leaves. If you'd like, you could add decorative stitches with your sewing machine to highlight this. It's just kind of fun to guide this, and I like doing straight stitch kind of doodling. I can finish this at a later time, but I'd again like to show you our finished pillow. Here we've used double needle stitching and straight stitching to create an heirloom. An option for stitching the embroidery onto a fabric is to press it on using transfer pins. This is a kind of a cheater's way, but it really is a very attractive design. On this Batiste fabric, we have pressed on a design, and it almost looks as if it has been stitched on. It truly is heirloom quality as well. We've simply used some paper that was somewhat transparent and transfer pins and just traced a design. You don't have to be an artist, you just have to find a design and trace around it. I have a stitching book and placed a piece of paper over the design that I'd like to trace, and use an iron-on transfer pin that you shake a little bit so that the ink flows through, and then simply trace whatever you'd like to transfer into the fabric. You can have your children draw designs as far as that goes. This would be kind of an interesting effect. The only thing to keep in mind that when you press this, you're going to get a mirror image of what you have traced. So try to avoid names, etc. when doing this. And as fast as you can draw, that's as fast as you'll get a stitching mark or a stitching pattern on your fabric. So there we have a quick little design. The design will be a little bit lighter than what we have, what you see right here, because after it's transferred the fabric, it loses some of its intensity. We'll have the right side of the fabric, and we meet the trace design to the fabric, positioning it right where you'd like. And I like to place a couple of pins in the corners so that it's positioned just the way I'd like it. And I have a dry iron without steam, and I'm going to press. And I do like to move the iron position so that I do not end up with any press marks on the fabric itself. One time we ended up with the impression from the iron holes on the fabric itself. And when I lift this up, you'll see a delicate design. And this is a fast way of adding embroidery design to an heirloom garment.
Coming up next, letters from our mailbag.
In the sewing segments of today's program, I dealt quite a bit with the double needles, and I'd like to review the sizing of those needles for you so that you know exactly which size to use for the various projects. For the pin tucks, whether they're corded or just stitched flat with a pin tuck foot, I recommend using the two smaller size needles, the 1.6 millimeter and the 2.0 millimeter. Now remember, those numbers refer to the distance between the needles, a very small distance. When working with the shadow work, the stitching, I like to use the 3.0 millimeter. The needles are a little bit larger. There's greater distance between the needles to give us, obviously, the shadow effect. Remember, on the back side of this, we worked with the woolly type nylon thread so that it would shadow through to the right side. Kind of a nice change of, or new improvement kind of in this type of heirloom sewing. With the larger distance between those double needles, the needle size also gets larger. And if you ever have problems with your thread fraying, you got to go bump it up one size. The larger eye will prevent the thread from fraying. Just keep that in mind, basically, for all sewing. Now we have hints, and many of them pertain to heirloom sewing. Jackie Beck watches our program in Glenwood, Arkansas on AETN TV on Saturday mornings. She works with heirloom sewing for her daughter and smocks collars and does all sorts of interesting things. And the hint of hers that I'd like to pass along to you is on making piping. This is what Jackie says. When I make my own piping for straight yokes, collars, or cuffs, I first pull the cord through some beeswax. The wax stiffens the cord, making it easier to handle. And she adds, I hope your viewers will find these hints helpful. Well, Jackie, I thought that was a particularly interesting hint of working with the beeswax and making piping, because this we have in many of our sewing areas for running hand sewing thread through this area to make it more easily to manage. And this is Jackie's sample, and you can get the general idea that the beeswax works. And that makes it easier to sew next to get even stitching, and obviously better to handle. So a simple little hint to make heirloom sewing, those piping areas, go a little bit more smoothly. Thank you, Jackie. Lorraine Peterson watches our program from St. Petersburg, Florida. It's on establishing grain line. Here's her hint. To find the lengthwise grain of fabric after the selvage has been cut off, first notice the weave of the material. Along one thread line, fold in a few pleats and hold them up. Observe how it hangs. Do the same along the other thread line. One set of pleats will appear stiff while the others will hang gracefully. The set that hangs gracefully will have the grain line, threads running down them, and this is how you know exactly where the grain is. I thought this especially important, and thank you, Lorraine, for this hint, for this series, because when working with heirloom sewing, many times we're cutting the fabric into strips or into sections, and that selvage may be lost. So Lorraine's hint on working with the grain line, I think, is very appropriate. We've pinned some pleats into sections of this fabric, and on one side, the pleats do appear to be a little bit, they hang a little bit straighter. Real definite pleat hangs, definite grain line hangs to them. We'll find the other grain line, and they're much softer. They kind of fan right out. So this is our grain line area. Another indicator would be to look at the threads, just on weave on some fabrics, a little section of it. The finer threads are in the lengthwise, and generally the coarser threads are the crosswise grain, the filler threads. Ann McKinley lives in La Cruces, New York, and watches our program on public television in New York. And she writes, here's a tip I use when sewing double needles and serging for things like the ones you show in heirloom sewing. Instead of marking with a marker, I simply fold the fabric and press as many folds the desired distance apart that are needed. I have used this technique often on baby dresses, sheer blouses, and yokes for little girls' outfits. And this is a fine recommendation. I recommended earlier in this series to use an oil-free base pencil so that the markings would not reappear. But when working with your idea of pressing in the marks works just as well. Notice that on this sample we have press marked the rows for the double needle stitching. After stitching, these press marks will be included in the double needle stitching and you will not have to remove them. This is a great hint. I thank you for sending that to us. Now we have a hint from Phyllis Kinnaman, who lives in Hager City, Wisconsin. In an effort to keep laces or elastics from tangling and to make it easier to see what selections you have on hand, I keep my elastic and laces wrapped around a baby clothes hanger. One of those square ones that no one knows what to do with. You can hang it or store it flat, adds Phyllis to our note. Well, since we have a new little person at our house, I have quite a few of these hangers. And this is a great idea for storing the laces. We've had other storage ideas, and this is just another one to use to wrap it around the hanger. And you can see, as she added, exactly what you have on hand. I like this idea. Thank you. Our last hint from today comes from Terry Miller, and Terry watches our program in Charleston, Tennessee. She said, here's my hint. It is an heirloom sewing tip that Martha Pullen, who is a very excellent and well-known heirloom sewing instructor, refers to as Scotch tape stitch, but I give it my own little twist. She likes to put laces onto fabric by using the roll stitch, which we did in the first program of this series. And then she uses what she calls a Scotch tape tip. And then this is to use that same rolled stitch so that the lace will lie flat, but she sews from the wrong side using the 5-groove pintuck foot and runs the roll wrong side up through the middle groove with the machine setting at a very narrow width at about 0.5 and a stitch length of 1.5, so it's a small little satin stitch. After putting a lace edging onto fabric, whether it's gathered or flat, we use this we gather the edge and then simply use the pintuck foot. Here you can see how the pintuck foot, and I'm sewing on the wrong side of the fabric, and just sewing down the seam to make it lie very flat. And when you do this is Terry's little sample. It is so flat on the front side, but yet on the back side, you can see the little pintuck curl formed from the groove of the foot. It really works well. I recommended to use a straight stitch. I like this idea even better. So Terry, I thank you for this recommendation. Thank you all for your tips. If you'd like to submit a tip, send it to Busy Sewer Sewing Tip, care of Nancy's Notions, P.O. Box 683, Beaver Dam, Wisconsin 53916. And if we use your hint on the air, I'll send you a copy of our book. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Sewing with Nancy has been made possible by grants from the following companies. Bob Sewing Machines, offering German-built sewing machines worldwide since 1862. Freudenberg, manufacturers of Pellon non-woven interfacings and craft materials. Ginger Incorporated, a tradition of quality in scissors and shears for home, industry, and school. The McCall Pattern Company, the fashionable name in contemporary sewing patterns. A handy reference booklet from this 3-program series entitled Sew an Heirloom is available for only $4.75. Order the Sew an Heirloom booklet number TR545 by calling toll-free 1-800-336-8373, credit card order only. Or send a check or money order for $4.75 with your name and address to Nancy's Notions, P.O. Box 683, Beaver Dam, Wisconsin 539160683.
I've been watching Valley Public Television since it first came into this area. I especially like the science programs such as NOVA. Even the Civil War programs are great. And my granddaughter Lindsay just loves Sesame Street.
Valley Public Television, enriching your life.
This is what we see about Latin America and the Caribbean on most news reports. This is Americans. A 10-part...
Girl that's gone away. John Baptiste. This is the day. Oh, your love is gone.
Friday night at 10 on Valley Public Television.
The gang is back on Degrassi High. Each week, the tough realities and pressures facing adolescents today are confronted with sensitivity, humor, and compassion. It's the perfect program for teenagers. Watch Degrassi High, Sunday morning at 11:30, here on Valley Public Television, Channel 18.
Africa. Untamed. Mysterious. Dark. Threatening. Life. Death. Throughout time, Africa has been a magnet for each generation's boldest naturalists and most inspired photographers. And today, it is where three extraordinary pairs of filmmakers carry out their chosen life's work, creating powerful and revealing films for National Geographic, each in their own unique fashion.
To better understand our world, ourselves, and our future, this program is made possible by the people of Chevron. Chevron, giving thought to television.
Derek and Beverly Joubert, David and Carol Hughes, and Des and Jen Bartlett share the National Geographic Society's 100-year-old commitment to capturing sights never before witnessed and providing new clues to the endlessly compelling puzzle of animal behavior.
I think they're quite clear. They're a good line track.
Yeah?
Yeah, they are.
It's been over 10 years since the Jouberts quit their jobs, sold everything they owned, and started life over in the wilds of Botswana.
I think it was a risk in the beginning. We just knew that we wanted to do something different and we wanted to spend a lot of time together. One way for us to do that was to start making films. We were romantics. We were dreamers.
The stories that the Jouberts tell in their films are not recreations. They are real. It takes living with their subjects 24 hours a day to be able to capture images and tell stories like these.
We're out there looking for unusual footage, but we have to crash through the bush. We never quite know what we're going to get, but it's worth the chance to take.
In their film, Eternal Enemies, Lions and Hyenas, the Jouberts push the limits of natural history filmmaking to new extremes.
Eternal Enemies is basically a film about the war between lions and hyenas. There's only one way to describe the relationship between these two, and that is hatred. Lions and hyenas hate each other. There was a conflict out on the marsh, and we were busy filming that. And then in the distance, we saw the rest of the pride and the male lion coming. We had enough time to change film, put on the right lens, and start filming. And it was an incredibly long run. This male lion ran over half a mile chasing that hyena. And we managed to film all of that in high speed. It was a good present for us. We do films because we enjoy doing them, but we also make films for a very specific conservation reason. Man needs the spirit of wilderness to survive. Once that's gone, we die.
In the west of Africa, there is a place unique in all the world where the desert meets the sea. Here on the skeleton coast of Namibia, world-renowned naturalists Des and Jen Bartlett have been living and filming for 8 years. Using 2 specially equipped ultralight aircraft called drifters, the Bartletts patrol an area twice the size of Vermont. Finding any animals at all can be a challenge, even under the best of conditions. But here, where the east wind can blow like a blast furnace for a week to 10 days at a time, chronicling this wondrously beautiful land and the remarkable creatures who survive there would not have been at all possible without years of effort and commitment. The Bartletts are more than filmmakers. They are environmental activists as well. And to view their film is to understand why. This is one of only a dozen lions that roamed this coastal desert when the Bartletts arrived here 8 years ago. It is a site that will probably never be recaptured on film again. For today, there are no lions remaining on the Skeleton Coast. So that other endangered animals of the Skeleton Coast can be saved, the Bartletts are working to provide the area with a much-needed sanctuary for wildlife. Through their efforts, Des and Jen Bartlett hope to ensure that their extraordinary film, Skeleton Coast, will never become a record of things that once were, but are no more. Filmmakers Carol and David Hughes are considered to be trailblazers in the field of natural history filmmaking. In order to create films that are a celebration of incredible animals and unusual behavior, the Hugheses rely less on circumstance and perseverance than they do on instinct and ingenuity.
I started very, very young watching animals. Maybe just time spent close to animals, watching them interact, gives you that kind of knowledge after a time. You just absorb it in some mysterious way.
I used to be very nervous of spiders, roaches, that kind of thing. But I've found out that everything is more scared of you than you are of it initially. And as soon as I I realized that, and I got interested in the thing as an animal.
In order to make one of their films, David and Carol Hughes become a virtual extension of their subject's natural habitat, spending up to 2 years camped out in the African desert, the Central American rainforest, or the African bush, miles from the nearest road.
Right from the beginning, when you start trying to photograph animals or study them, that's what you're absorbed in trying to predict what they're going to do next. If you're doing a study on the behavior of an animal, you've only succeeded at that stage that animal's behavior becomes predictable to you. Otherwise, it all comes as a surprise and you can never be in the right position, have the right lens on, be shooting at the right time.
Through perseverance and an unimaginable dedication to wildlife, these filmmakers spend their lives creating films that bring us all a little closer to the world we live in.
We now join our regularly scheduled program, already in progress.
Puffing strip. Now I'll just do a short little puffing strip right now. After stitching one side, then flip it over. Since batiste is reversible, basically, you can just now sew on the other side. It really doesn't matter. And do the same technique so that your gathering cords will always be at one end. On this sample that I have finished earlier, I've used dark green thread and blue fabric. Obviously, you'd use matching thread, but I have the gathering cords at the lower edge. And grab those gathering cords and try to gather both sides at once so that you are getting equidistant or the same amount of gathering on both sides. And this is probably the section of this heirloom sewing technique that takes a little bit of time. And then try to disperse the gathers so that they are fairly even. At my ironing board, I have a puffing strip, another puffing strip, pinned to the ironing board to press or to steam. I find it important that I should get everything placed on this area so that it is evenly gathered. And then steam it. I don't put the iron down at all. I just steam it so that those steams, or the steam really sets the gathers. And then after this section has dried, then you can attach it to your heirloom sewing project and put it in wherever you'd like, between laces and trims or fabric, and I think it gives a delicate look. The next heirloom sewing technique that I'd like to show you is called crossover tucks. The tucks on this detachable collar are very subtle. They give a window pane effect. It's stitched on batiste fabric with directional stitching. The sewing is simple. There's a few keys on pressing and sewing that I'd like to pass on to you right now. Cut the fabric larger than you need, quite a bit larger. For the detachable collar, we cut it 3 to 5 inches wider and longer because the tucks obviously take up length and width. And then mark the fabric about 1 inch to 1.5 inches along both the lengthwise grain and the crosswise grain, along all edges of your rectangle piece of fabric. And then press. Pressing is probably the most important part of the crossover tucks, and I have the marks placed on my fabric, and place the press marks just by folding the fabric along each mark and press. You could also use a grease-free pencil or oil-free pencil if you'd like. However you'd like to do this, go right ahead. Since we're going to be sewing on the fold with wrong sides together, I do like to do the press mark. I think it's the most effective. So it just takes a little time to mark all the lines with the press mark, and then you're ready to sew. Today I'm going to be using contrasting threads so that you can see a little bit more clearly, but you would be using matching thread to your fabric, I think, for the most effective heirloom look. On my machine, I have a blind hem foot. Now, this foot comes with almost all sewing machines as an accessory model. Yours may not look just like mine, but it will have an adjustable guide bar, as this has, and I have the guide bar all the way over to the right, so that as I'm sewing, I'm going to guide the fold of the fabric along my red guide bar. The reason, obviously, that I use a blind hem foot here is so that I have even tucks. Sometimes this foot is called a top stitching foot. It really doesn't matter what it's called, just so it has that adjustable guide bar, and you can adjust it to get even tucks. Now, I'm sewing all my lengthwise marks first. It really doesn't matter. It's just my preference to do length first. Things a little more stable of a grain. And sew. And you can zip right along here because you have that foot on your machine, and things go evenly and quickly. And as with all heirloom sewing, I'm using kind of a fine needle for the basic sewing. Now, after you've sewn all the tucks that go in one direction, you're going to press them. Obviously, they're going to go all in one direction again. On this sample, which I've sewn earlier, on the batiste, you can just watch as I press, and because of the nature of the fabric, the high fiber contact with cotton in it, it will press very nicely and look nice and flat and nice. This is a combination of a blend of fabric with cotton and polyester, 100% cotton. It really doesn't matter. Whatever you'd prefer, that's what you would use for your heirloom sewing. And now mark with the ironing board and your iron the tucks that go in the opposite direction. Again, pressing them in the same direction as the other tucks were stitched. Just making it easy on yourself. And just keep pressing. It would take you a little bit longer to press all of the crosswise lengths, but then when putting this underneath your presser foot, double check that you're going to sew so that the tucks are going to be stitched downward. Using the same setting, the same guide bar of your blind hem foot, just continue to sew. And this happens to be a very simple heirloom sewing idea, but an idea that I think adds texture to the fabric and some great interest. Let me show you a sample of working with this. Then after all the other rows have been stitched, you press those in one direction, and you have this unique window pane look without a lot of effort. Now I'd like to show you what I like to call released tucks. It's like having pin tucks in the front of an heirloom garment, but that the tucking stops in the middle of the fabric. It doesn't go the whole length of the garment. Just in the yoke of this little girl's dress that we've begun, we have 5 little tucks going down. It gives a fullness through the lower area. Traditionally, you'd have to cut your thread tails, pull them to the back side, and tie them. But to save some time and to make it look very neat, we're going to just use one thread to sew both bottom and top. It sounds a little bit more difficult than it is. It's actually kind of fun to do. On your machine, remove the top thread. Just take it out. And pull that bobbin thread, 20 inches or so, a little bit longer than the length of the tuck that you're going to be sewing with. Now the object is to thread the needle from the back to the front. It's opposite what we do. Normally we go front to back. Now we're going to pull this bobbin thread up through the back. And it's impossible to do this without a needle threader. So get out your needle threader that you may have and get the threader through the eye of your needle. Find the end of your thread, put it through the opening of the threader, and pull it backwards, or pull it through from the back of the needle. And that's the hard part. We'll get it off the toe of the foot. There we are. And now the rest is to thread the machine with this thread. I'm going to hold with my right hand the thread in the spool area, and then thread the machine as if I was using a spool of thread, and then just pull it taut. Now, if you have a lot of thread, you may want to wind it on a spool of thread, but I find if I just lay it through there, that's fine. I really don't use a lot of thread. You'll be amazed how few inches of thread you'll need to sew a tuck. On your fabric, cut a rectangle of fabric larger than your pattern piece. You're going to cut this out after you've sewn the tucks, but I have generally given myself an indication of where the neckline is going to be by tracing the outline of the neckline. Not that I'm going to follow this, but I just wanted it so I could press mark where I'd like my tucks to radiate. So I've done that, and also at the very end, I marked a little stopping spot with just a tip of a pen so I knew where to start to sew. I have pressed these tucks with wrong sides together, and now place it underneath my presser foot. Just finished working with the crossover tucks where I used a blind hem foot, or sometimes called a top stitching foot. Have that same foot on, and I have the guide bar all the way over to the right. And now I'm simply going to put the fabric, the fold of the fabric, right next to that red guide bar, and try to start sewing right at the ending point. You see, there aren't any thread tails coming through because this is one continuous thread. It's kind of an interesting thought. And now all there's to do is to sew, aligning the fold of the tuck with the guide bar. And now you don't have to tie those thread tails at the end because there aren't any. When I show you this tuck, you'll see that this is continuous thread both on top and the back side. And if I had matching thread, it would look very neat. And just remove that little dot with a drop of water and sew the rest of the tucks. You have to go through the same process. Remove what's left over from that top thread. I'm going to discard it. I'd pull out an extra, 20 inches of thread, rethread it again, and sew. It's just kind of a different philosophy of working with tucks by using this one thread. Throughout this series, we've worked with a lot of creative aspects, and there's just one more I'd like to mention, and that is working with the decorative stitches. This pillowcase we showed you earlier through this series, the decorative stitches through this area, not purchased embroidery, but were just stitched embroidery by stitching over the wash-away type of fabric. As you've seen, creating an heirloom just takes a little bit of sewing know-how. It's not very difficult, and I'm sure many of you will enjoy this type of sewing.
Coming up next, letters from our mailbag.
In the sewing segments of today's program, I worked with some specialty needles and some fairly basic sewing techniques, but I think the specialty needles are fun to work with, especially the wing needle. Just as the name implies, there are appendages on the side. This is a size 100 needle. It's big in itself, but then plus it has this wide flange along the side. When working with this, make certain that you choose a stitch that's relatively open, that it does not have a lot of concentration of thread, so that the hole is created by the wideness of the needle. And it's really a look that you'd like for heirloom sewing. Usually we do not want holes in our fabric, but here it's okay. We also use a stabilizer on the back of the fabric because of that needle going in and out of the fabric. It really draws the fabric. So here the sample again shows the water-soluble stabilizer on the back side. This is quite important. You could create the entre-deux, the purchase trim look at the sewing machine with the wing needle, a decorative stitch, and we again have these stitches named and numbered in the booklet that accompanies this program, and then using gimp thread with the cording foot and sewing over this. And it looks very comparable to the purchase trim that costs $2 or $2.50 a yard, so you can sew that yourself. It's now time for hints from viewers, busy sewer sewing tips, and we have a wide variety of them today. Alice Blakewood watches our program from Lafayette, Louisiana. I like the way she starts her letter. I enjoy watching your program on Saturday mornings. I put my baby down for his nap, grab a cup of coffee, and settle back in my comfy chair to learn new techniques and get motivated to attack that collection of fabric I've accumulated. Here's her tip. She said, this tip has eliminated a small aggravation for me, namely those little wire staples that attach buttons to cards. They won't give up and usually come off with the card along with the button. Well, finally a solution, and here it is. Simply insert a sturdy pin, such as a corsage pin or a safety pin, behind the staple on the back of the card, then pull off the button. Alice, this is an idea that I'm sure most of us will now use from now on, because usually when you pull off the button, the staple comes right along with it. So here we have a corsage pin, and we just pull, and presto, the staple stays on the cardboard. Alice, I could have used this technique for about the last 25 years of sewing, but I'll use it from now on. Thank you. Now we have a hint from Betty Scott, who watches our program from Townsend, Maryland. My sewing tip is to use a strip of pattern tracing material over the pattern when I do the markings. It keeps my tracing wheel from cutting through the pattern and may be used repeatedly. Because you can see through the material, it makes it easy to see what you're doing. You know, so often we buy yardage of fabric or material that is used to trace off a multiple size pattern. It's non-woven. You can see through it, somewhat transparent. Well, this is what Betty's talking about. She places a strip of this over her pattern, and she sent us a little scrap of a pattern where it had markings, and then has the carbon paper and then the fabric, and runs her tracing wheel over the markings. This top layer of fabric carries the brunt of the tracing wheel little line or grids, and then does not cause the tissue paper underneath to be torn. So you can use this over and over again. And I like her idea to cut strips and to keep it nearby so when you have time to mark, it's right there. Betty, again, a nice idea. Elaine Bauer lives in Schuyler, Alberta, Canada, and has a comment regarding our Quick Jackets program. She said, after watching so many of your programs, I thought I'd share an idea with you. The program about Quick Jackets gave me an idea to interface a patch pocket and form the rounded corners all at the same time. I showed this type of pocket, as she mentioned, in the Quick Jacket series, but she's made a little addition. Rather than interfacing the pocket first, she interfaces it as we go along. Here, Betty sent along some samples where the interfacing is cut the size of the pocket minus the hem allowance. Notice the hem allowance on this upper pocket has been pressed down. And the fusible side of the interfacing is facing you right now. This is the right side toward the fabric. She has things sandwiched together, and then you'd sew around the corners. Then after sewing these and turning this right side out, she did some trimming in the seam allowance, especially down in the corners, so that the rounded corners could be shaped. And then, as I've done on the other side, we just flip this to the underside. In our series, we used a fusible thread to help interface this or to fuse the layers together. But now, in Betty's sample, we have the fusible interfacing next to the fabric. To finish this, all she did on this sample was to press, and now the pocket is completely interfaced and the corners are nicely shaped. And you could also do this on the serger. And this sample shows that the seams have been serged on a 3/4 thread serger, and it gives a nice clean finished pocket ready to be top stitched to the garment. I really appreciate when you comment on the variations of the techniques that I show you, because there are always more than one way of doing things. Dolores Steiner lives in Huntington Valley, Pennsylvania. I buy a plain t-shirt in white and make a lace pocket on the left side and embellish it with seed pearls and outlining each flower. I also use sequins and tiny satin flowers, silver beads, etc., and sew around the lace. She said it makes a lovely addition to just a simple t-shirt. And her daughter Sonia is modeling one of her shirts, where on the pocket area she has the lace, sequins, beading, another way to add a little heirloom touch to a very basic garment, and now looks so just personalized, very nice. Dolores, I like that idea too. Suzanne Wiespart watches our program from Fullerton, California. Here's my hint, she starts. When yardage ribbons or trims are on sale, I buy extra to use as wrapping for presents. For my friends who are quilters, craftspeople, or sewers. She said the fabric paper is relatively expensive when you compare it to the price of fabric and ribbon, and it adds a little personalized touch to the gift, almost giving two gifts at once. So we've just wrapped a simple holiday gift with some fabric. It can be used as an applique after it's been unwrapped. You don't throw it away like paper. And the ribbon, of course, can be reused again as a wrapping project or in a sewing project. We've used fabric many times for making napkins and wrapping things in napkins, so there are many ways of using fabric, multiple purposes. I thank you for sending in your hints. If you'd like to submit a hint to Sewing with Nancy, send it to Busy Sewer Sewing Tips, care of Nancy's Notions, P.O. Box 683, Beaver Dam, Wisconsin 53916. And if I use your hint on the air, I'll send you a copy of our book. I hope you've enjoyed this series on Sew and Heirloom. My goal is that you'll be inspired to make something creative as a gift or something just for yourself. Bye for now.
Sewing with Nancy has been made possible by grants from the following companies. Boff Sewing Machines, offering German-built sewing machines worldwide since 1862. Freudenberg, manufacturers of Pellon non-woven interfacings and craft materials. Ginger Incorporated, a tradition of quality in scissors and shears for home, industry, and school. The McCall Pattern Company, the fashionable name in contemporary sewing patterns.
And welcome to Art of Sewing. I'm Sue Hausman, and it's my pleasure to be with you today and for the next few weeks to share the joy of sewing. The image of sewing is really changing. Today we sew not because we have to, but because we love it, to create beautiful garments for ourselves and gifts for friends and home decorations as well. Whether you're a beginning sewer or someone who's been sewing for years, or maybe you used to sew and you'd like to get back to it. That's what we're here for. From craft to couture, we're going to help you in the next few weeks to gain new sewing skills. And I'm very excited to bring guests that will help you with that. And today's guest is going to be Ann Person. And Ann Person is the creator and the founder of Stretch and Sew. And Ann, I can't tell you what a joy it is to have you with us on our first show, because I'm sure that many of our viewers, just like me, have been sewing with you for so many years. And I can't tell you how many little outfits I made for my children when they were little. Tell me, Ann, what are you doing today, and what do you feel is happening in sewing today?
Well, Sue, I'm pleased to be here, first of all, and lots of things have changed. Stretch and Sew started years ago when I knew how to sew with knit, and I started teaching people how. And then as time went on, we decided to take the same shortcut, easy techniques that we developed for knits and apply them to wovens as well. And so, and of course, we no longer have just a t-shirt and a pair of pull-on pants, but the whole thing has changed to a wonderful wardrobes as well.
Now, where do you get these ideas?
Oh, that's fun. That's the best part of all.
You like
we all love to shop, and we all love to look at ready-to-wear and get ideas from ready-to-wear. And I have the most fun of all. And my husband and I were shopping in New York one day, and I saw this fabulous green wool dress, and I thought it was the most beautiful dress, and it had some really interesting things about it. And so I looked at it, and I said, oh, $900, I'm not going to spend that much money for that dress to copy it.
Okay.
And so I started to leave, and then I thought, I'll never remember that when I get home, and so I went back and bought it and took it home. And here is an example of taking a knit.
The buttonholes on this one?
Yes, by all means,
I think that's such a great idea for our
This is
sewers.
a wool double knit, and the buttonhole is done on the diagonal, which is really nice as far as a technique is concerned, and it gives it a couture look as well.
It sure does. Okay, and I see that invisible zipper.
That's right.
Now,
that's being used a great deal now.
What did you do with it?
Here I did it in a woven, so it gives you an example of taking a knit. The dress can be either knit or woven. The sizing doesn't have to change. The ease is perfect for both.
Great. So you have this pattern, and it makes up into
the city dress.
It's called the city dress. All right. That's wonderful. And I'm wearing the traveler top and the gold skirt, and you told me there was a new look to that as well.
That's such a popular pattern. It has a wonderful side seam pocket. That's a fabulous technique, and we put the buttons up the front. It has a facing, which is certainly possible with knits, and as well as many other techniques for finishing them. And so this is a very popular dress.
And I know those bomber jackets are
everybody's wearing a bomber jacket, and here it is, and we've done the little plain front. The ribbing starts at this edge and goes over ribbing at the cuffs and ribbing at the neck. Very, very simple.
And I like this so that the ribbing doesn't pull at the waist, you know, and pull across your tummy, which is so important.
Nice flat look.
Yeah, well, there was a special one that I asked you to bring, and you did, and I sure appreciate that. And that was that little fold back jacket, because I just love this little jacket. and tell everyone about how this works.
Well, this little fold-back jacket, and this is funny, you know, Sue, we decided years ago to give patterns a name.
Oh, that's right.
Here we come up, and then you start trying to think of what you're going to call each pattern instead of just giving it a number. And this particular jacket, the name is fold-back jacket, and it's a cute little, and when you do a contrast color, it's a cute facing. But if you unbutton it and fold it over like so, and button it, you have a double-breasted jacket. So you have a separate look, and our customers just love this jacket.
So it's like a dual version.
Right, and we always try to keep the wardrobe thought in mind. And so with this particular fabric, we did a lovely cotton interlock stirrup pant in the green tone. Okay, so and then we have a black as well. So
we could wear this with the green or the black stirrup pant or skirt. I wanted to show them something in here. You're trying to button this up. Oh, okay. This is such a great tip. When you go to sew down this facing from the right side in the ditch, just keep going and attach a piece of Velcro with that straight stitch in the ditch. And then what we do with that Velcro?
And then we put our shoulder pad in, and our shoulder pad has Velcro on it. And so there we go.
So in one step, we're putting that in.
That's right.
Wonderful. And then what I loved about this, since we made 2 pair of stirrup pants,
yes,
why not have something else to go with them?
And I love this jacket.
That gives a totally different look.
Right. When you, sometimes we can't find ribbing to trim jackets with, and we want that sweater look. And this is a single knit cotton, which is just wonderful, but we faced it rather than put a piece of ribbing on. And of course it takes the buttonholes beautifully. And we have a jacket out of a single knit cotton, which you might think you could only make a t-shirt from.
Sure, how wonderful. Well, I asked Rhonda to wear one of those little fold-back jackets. You brought it, and I thought this needs a body, no question.
And Rhonda did a great job.
She sure, it's as if you, I think you're going to not get this one back when you leave.
Well, I need to add some length to the sleeve. Maybe we'll put a pink cuff on,
Rhonda Heinge, educator for Viking Sewing Machine Company, welcome, and thanks for modeling for us today.
I was happy to.
Yeah, and step out into the middle a little bit with me, and let's share with them the fold-back jacket in a pink fold-back and the blue. And Ann, tell us about the inside of this jacket.
Well, I used our knit iron-on interfacing. This is a cotton interlock, and we wanted the skirt to be soft and flowing. We wanted the shell to be soft, but the jacket needed a little body, so I simply fused the knit interfacing to the interlock, and we have a lovely, almost a double knit weight to the fabric.
Sure. Oh, what a great idea. And then the little shell top, which is just a real simple pattern, and the little shell
stitch.
Okay, this is one of the boat neck top versions, I know.
Right.
Yeah, great. Now, maybe we could tell them about the skirt and my skirt. Can you see my skirt too? We're wearing the same skirt. Wait, I'll try to get up a little taller there.
This is a 6-gore skirt, and we're going to sew this today. We're going to show everyone how to do that.
Great. So when they turn off their TV, they can make it, right?
That's right.
Oh, well, thanks so much for sharing that with us, Rhonda. We appreciate it. And I had just a few basic questions I thought that we maybe could talk about. First, I know you have a great new book on the basics, and I've sure enjoyed this. And I get asked all the time about pre-washing fabric, like the outfit Rhonda has on now. When you come home from the store, should we pre-wash our fabric?
Whatever I'm going to do to that garment, after I've sewn it, I do it to the fabric first. I feel so strongly about it. Why spend an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours making a lovely garment and planning to wash it? Then when you do wash it, you've ruined the garment and all your work is lost. So if the fabric is going to do something terrible, let it happen first.
I'll agree with that, 100%. That's my motto, too. And I understand from your book that if you use a soap rather than a detergent and cold water, the colors will be maintained on the bright colors a little bit more.
That's right. And also I make sure that I use a liquid when I'm using cold water. And again, if I think that garment's going to be washed in hot water, later I do it first.
Okay, so do whatever you're going to do to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Now, what about size of pattern? I know we're going to do this 6-gore skirt, and I get asked so often, what size should I buy, and how do patterns size?
Well, Stretch and Sew, we size our patterns in 2-inch increments. Okay. And we're very correct in terms of if we say this is a 36 bust that this garment is designed for, a person with a 36 bust wore that garment and it fit perfectly. And so don't cheat and say, we don't say I'm a 10 when I really am a 14.
Would we ever do that?
No.
Okay, and my little rule really is to always get out the tape measure. Now, I love this little tape measure because it has inches on both sides.
Right.
You brought this from your place. And I just measure across that pattern piece.
Right, and if you're doing a hip measurement, go down 9 inches to do your measurement.
So from the waistline, go down 9 inches. Okay.
And then because this is a flared skirt, we're not going to be very concerned about how much that pattern measures. If it was a quite close-fitting garment, then we would be more careful.
Okay, so measure across and then take off the seam allowance. This, of course, has quarter-inch seam allowances, and it tells me that.
Yes.
So basically, I've got a piece about 7 inches across, okay, and there's 6 of them.
That's right.
6 times 7 is 42, okay? And if you have 42, then you're going to have to be sure that you have that in there. So, okay. Now, how would we go about cutting this out?
Well, because this is a cotton interlock, I'm going to cut not directionally, but I'll go either direction because I don't feel there's any nap in this, but a lot of knits do have a nap or a feeling that there's a differentiation in color as you go one way or the other. And so that eliminates a lot of waste. If I had to cut all of this one direction, it would take a lot more fabric.
It would. Now, I notice we have 2 pattern pieces. One is the longer version,
long
right?
And the short, and so we've simply done that for our customer so that she can take either pattern piece and use it. And we just need 1 pattern piece for 6 gores. They're all cut the same.
Isn't that amazing? And if she really wants to change the length from this, she could just take it off the bottom.
That's right.
Or if she wanted a little fuller, just pinch it up in the middle.
That's right, and bring this fullness up to the top.
My recommendation always is to take a skirt you like the length of and just lay it right out on your pattern and use that as a guide.
Good idea.
Is that a good idea? Okay, so once we've cut it out, and we actually have cheated, we've got one cut out for you because we thought that we wouldn't take the time to cut it. And we've cut 6 of those gores from the knit. And that was sure easy. So we've got a helper over at the sewing machine, and she's going to make it real easy for us to show you how we stitch this together. So let's all go together over to Patty Jo, and I'd like to introduce Patty Jo Larson, who is an educator for Viking Sewing Machine Company, and she's going to do the stitching today, right? Sure. Thanks, Patty Jo. Now, what I'd like you to do, because I know that you don't all have the same kind of sewing equipment, and I'd really like to make it possible for everyone to do this.
I always feel that way, too. It's really important.
What we're going to do is sew this skirt together with 3 different seams. And so you choose the method that you have that's best. And so the first 2 gores we're going to sew together with a straight stitch.
Right, and because this is a flared skirt, we're going to start our sewing from the bottom and sew up. We always sew from the top or to the wide to the narrow when we're working with a knit.
Okay, so when we're sewing, we would sew from the wide to the narrow.
That's right, and this is a 1/4-inch seam allowance.
1/4-inch seam allowance, and there we go. Well, she's sewing it with a 5/8 because she didn't read the pattern instructions, but that's okay. So in other words, we would just have, now we've got a straight stitch then sewn on that seam. Would we press that open?
If it were 5/8, we would. With a 1/4-inch, I don't. I press it to one side.
To one side. Okay, this is really good information because they need to know this. Well, I know lots of them have sewing machines that have a seam and overcast stitch. Let's put that in there. And so Patty Jo's going to sew the
1/4-inch, Patty.
This time I even have a special foot end for seam overcast for 1/4-inch. So I'll use that.
So this time we've got it right, and we're sewing that 1/4-inch seam allowance. That skirt might be too small if we sewed them all with 5/8.
If we did them all with 5/8, but we can get away with a little bit.
Okay, and so here we're stitching with a stitch that sews the seam and overcasts it all at one time.
At one time.
And I'm sure if your machine has this stitch, you will want to put on the overcast foot, which usually has a little wire that those stitches jump over. Okay, I think we probably got enough.
Keeps it from pulling the edge in then.
Keeps it from drawing up the edge. So we'll lay this one right next to the other to show you the difference between the 2 and how that did the seam, and overcast it all at one time.
With just a sewing machine, yes.
But now we have other options, and I know a lot of you own sergers, and you're saying, why are you doing that on the sewing machine? Well, we wanted everyone to be able to make this skirt this afternoon. But again, from the bottom up, if you want to sew it in half the time or even 3 times as fast, you simply put that under the foot of your serger, and of course that 1/4 inch is absolutely perfect for serger sewing. Is that one of the reasons a lot of the patterns have 1/4 inch? Or?
Yes, it is. But I've always done 1/4 inch on knits, even when we didn't have a serger.
Because
we
it
use
doesn't
the
waste.
1/4 inch. We don't. We really, that seam allowance won't stay flat if we press it open on a single knit.
Okay.
And so it just gets in there. Isn't that
there
gorgeous?
you see the 3 options. That is gorgeous. And of
Did
course
you notice the difference in speed? I guess you did.
We did, I think.
What we love
now,
is quick.
I like sewing two together, 2 together, 2 together. Of course, I'm a piecer when I make quilt tops, and I think that prevents some distortion, too. Now I would go and put those 3 sets together and make my skirt. So, again, we've cheated a little bit, and if Patty Jo will lift that one down, I'm going to lay this one up there because I want to show that we have one that we've actually completely stitched the 6 gores together. I mean, that's how easy.
That's right.
Well, what's the next step, Ann?
We have our elastic, and we take a strip of elastic, and we're going to sew it together. Patty, I want you to show them how you did that, putting it together.
Yeah, I like to use about a postage stamp size square stitch. So I can go...
Let me explain what we're doing, because I'm not sure that it's exactly clear, but we cut our piece of elastic. While you're sewing that, Patty Jo, I'll just get it ready.
I'm impressed with what Patty Jo's doing with that machine. It sews in a box.
Yeah, it sews around the elastic.
This makes it nice. Do you feel it's stronger if you overlap about an inch in your...
About an inch is what I usually overlap. And I cut my elastic 3 to 4 inches smaller than my waist, depending on how tight I like the elastic to feel.
Oh, okay, so here we have the piece of elastic that we've cut, okay? And then we overlap, and this is 3 to 4 inches less than our waist.
That's right.
Plus an overlap?
Of an inch.
Of an inch. And then we overlap it an inch, like so. Okay, just
and then sew it together, as we've done here in a little box.
Okay,
that's right.
If you have to, you can turn it, of course, so it would work well.
That's right. And then we take our elastic and put it in quarters, divide it in fourths. And that's kind of a rule in sewing with many things where we're stretching elastic or ribbing to a garment is we use those quarter divisions.
I know Patty Jo has a pictogram pen there in the top drawer. Let's get that out and show how you do that, because I think that's important.
And so what I do is take this wonderful little pen, and this pen will go away, you know, it's invisible, and I first of all mark my elastic in one place, and then I fold the elastic right at that place, and I come over and I make another mark on my elastic, make it on both sides. Then I put those 2 marks together, just like this, and I make another one. So now I've marked it in quarter divisions.
So this is front, back, side, side.
That's right, and I always put my piece section in the center back.
All right.
Then I have 6 gores, so we already have found the halfway points here by having a gore on either side. We put those 2 gores together, like so, and we put a mark at the quarter division here, and a quarter division here. Then we put the elastic on the skirt, and we have decided we need to turn our skirt right side out to do this. And we've decided that this is the center back, find our mark, and put the elastic on the mark and match all 4 marks, and then with the serger, sew around the top of the skirt, stretching the elastic. And one of the nicest things, you of course can do this with a zigzag stitch too, Sue.
Okay, I think that's a good point. If you could certainly make this skirt and do the elastic waistband with...
You can even do it with a straight stitch. The zigzag's a lot nicer, and I think almost everyone today. But my theory has always been, I want it to be so simple you could do it with a treadle if you
so we want everyone to be able to do this. And so what we've done is actually surge that elastic to the top edge
We
of the
stretched
skirt.
the elastic all the way out as we sewed it to the skirt.
Okay, so
and
as
we didn't worry about stretching the skirt. That wasn't necessary, but we wanted the elastic to be stretched so that it was smooth, and the serger holds that elastic so beautifully.
So as we sewed, we worked with the elastic on top, and we surged around the top edge, catching the bottom. Now, can we tell, do you still use that little thing you used to say about sew with the relaxed?
With a relaxed bottom, yes, that's
How
right.
many of you can relate to that? That's what I remember from many, many years ago. I'm not going to tell how many, but it's still true. Sew with a relaxed bottom and stretch the one on top. Okay, so that's a little rule to remember. And then, of course, once you've stretched it and serged it, then you can simply let go, and you've got that elasticity.
Right.
What's the next step?
Next step is to turn the elastic over and stitch the elastic in place. And I pin that elastic to the skirt at every one of the seams. So I pin the elastic to the skirt at every one of the seams.
So you'd have 6 pins.
I'd have 6 pins around the circle. Then after I pinned it in all the edges, then I simply stretch it out, smooth like so, and sew from the right side through. And Sue, you did something that I love, and I hadn't done it with my skirt. When I sewed it, I'd used a straight stitch. Sometimes I use a zigzag, but normally I'll stretch really hard and use a straight. But you did something even better.
I asked if I could share this when we went through this earlier, because I said my favorite, let's show what you've done first, and then I'll share what I would like to share.
I sewed the elastic to the skirt with a straight stitch. Then I also sewed along the top, and that's important because elastic sometimes has a tendency to crunch down or twist or do something inside. So I always catch the top edge. You could put 2 more rows on there if you wanted.
Sure, so you
But at least the bottom and the top.
Okay, and boy, wasn't that easy. Well, my little idea that I shared with Ann before we came on, I said, do you mind if I share what I do? I, too, think a zigzag. In the old days, we did a zigzag.
Yes.
We did a 3-step zigzag. But then I thought that was a clue that I had made it. And so my sewing today, I don't want anyone to think I made it. I want to tell them that I made it and have them say, oh, you made that. Right. And so what I like to do is to use a twin needle. And so you'll see on my pink skirt where I have used a twin needle stitch.
This is wonderful, and it's a wide twin needle.
Let's hold that up with it. You can see that it's a 4.0, and it's a stretch twin needle. And the stretch twin needle, you can tell because it has that little blue piece on the top. So Patty Jo, would you do a little stitch for us? Just a smidge there, and show how easy it is. Yeah, it'd probably be easier with your free arm. Right around that top edge, and we use a relatively long stitch length. And of course, the key with the twin needle is that we do stretch it as we're sewing around it, just as we did originally.
Oh, the elastic must be stretched out. But the beauty of the twin needle is the fact that the bobbin is only one. The needle has 2 threads, and so what happens is we have a zigzag on the wrong side.
Great. Now, can I share something? Well, let's show that. That's great, isn't it?
Isn't that pretty?
That's great.
Just looks so professional. And you could use your twin needle at the top as well, so it would just be beautiful.
Yeah. Actually, this is the top, because we're going to still do the bottom. And I want to share something else about twin needle, but let's get you started on the hem, because that definitely is my preference for hemming these skirts. Do you want to talk about that, Ann? You said you do a lot of that as well.
Yes, I love to use the twin needle for the hem of the skirt. I usually serge my skirt first before I use the twin needle, but it's not necessary.
Right.
But the thing that I like the twin needle to do is I like one of the needles to kind of miss the cut edge, and the other one to go on to the fabric itself. So what happens is that cut edge gets encased inside the zigzag as it goes along.
And maybe to explain that, there's only one bobbin.
That's right.
And there's 2 threads on top. So that bobbin thread swings from stitch to side. That's right. And that's wonderful because you have good little bit of stretch.
And that's the reason that we always sew from the right side with the twin needle.
While Patty Jo's stitching that, I'd like to share a little something about the blouse I'm wearing. And another tip for this twin needle and some elastic. My blouse is a woven, but I love this on knits as well. And especially with a scoopy blouse like this, sometimes that blouse can flop away from your neck. And I don't know if you can see it. I'll show it on my cuff, because I do it on my cuff, too. And in essence, when I put this blouse together, before I went to turn under that hem, actually I do it on the sleeve when it's in the flat, I actually serge a piece of the clear elastic. And if you haven't worked with this stuff, it is great.
It's nice. It's
I
so
just
lightweight.
serge a piece right along the raw edge on the wrong side. Then when I turn it under, I have elastic at the bottom of my sleeve so that when I push them up, they stay. And when I push them down, they aren't all bagged out from being pushed up. Works well on knits or on wovens. And we've done that on this little exercise outfit as well. Here you can see that it is serged on. And here you can see that it's been turned under and top stitched with a twin needle.
With a twin needle again. Yeah. And you know, Sue, someone might think that a twin needle would only work on a certain machine. Any machine that zigzags will take a twin needle.
Yeah, any machine that threads forward to back.
Oh.
Yeah, that threads forward to back and zigzags. So
Oh, okay.
take it, I didn't mean to correct you on that, but there are some side threading ones that zigzag, and they won't. But so keep that in mind. And twin needles are available for all your machines. Well, and one of the things we're going to be doing with each one of our programs is a quick project at the end of each program. And so we have a real quick, easy one today for you. First, while Patty Jo's getting ready, I want to share my belt. Okay, I'm going to change places with you, I think, and step out a little bit here so you can see my belt. And in essence, my belt, which is just a piece of artificial suede or leather, are you ready for this? is simply 1/8 of a yard of one of the artificial suedes or artificial leathers, and I bought it. It's across the 45-inch. I'm still okay with 45 inches. I don't know. I hope that doesn't change. But you, you can see that that was just cut for me, and the fabric store will be happy to cut you 1/8 of a yard of the beautiful suedes and leathers. And then I simply took that and tied it around my waist. Now, I might put a little Velcro on there, or I might pin it if I were going out, but you can see it stayed on through the whole program, that that's a pretty stable little belt that I've made. But we want to have gift ideas and quick projects that you can enjoy and make for others as well. And so today we thought we'd show you these ponytail scrunchies. Now, Patty Jo's going to share them with you. They're so expensive to buy. We've got about a minute. Let's show how we're going to make them.
These are fun. I've made a lot for my niece who has long hair. None of us on stage have long hair today, Sue, but you know, all you do, you have to have a strip of fabric. The longer your strip, the more full your scrunchie in the end. This is about long enough, about 20 minutes, or 20 minutes, 20 inches
20
long.
inches, okay.
And then if you use elastic for the inside, if you start with your elastic twice as long, that will also become your turning piece.
So tell me what you did
So
there.
here's what I'll do.
Don't do it. Just tell me what you did.
Just take a long strip of elastic and start with the serger.
And then serge along that edge.
Over the elastic. Catch it at the first part. Serge over the elastic. It's inside of here. And then this other end of the elastic is what you'll actually use inside.
So you made a little handle to turn it right side out. Okay, and then we can reuse that elastic later.
Right. And you pull this up to a real small size to fit your ponytail, and then just turn these edges under and
either hand stitch them or you can
I
machine.
zigzag on the sewing machine.
You can make a whole bunch of those. Won't that be fun? And your kids will love them. And thank you so much, Patty Jo. Thanks.
You're welcome.
And until next time, happy sewing.
Sue is offering a companion book to this Art of Sewing series. Step-by-step how-to project sheets are included for most of the garments, gifts, and crafts shown on the series. To order your copy, call 1-800-358-0001 or send $12.95 to Art of Sewing with Sue Hausman, Book 1, 11760 Berea Road, Cleveland, Ohio, 44111.
This baby was 9 months in the making and eagerly anticipated. And we're announcing a new arrival that's been years in the making and is one of the most eagerly anticipated series of the season, Childhood. 7 programs that trace a journey we've all made, but one which can still surprise us. How do families work? Why are children of the same parents often so different? What does play teach children about the grown-up world? When does a child become an adult? For the first time on television, we'll take a close look at the lives of children all over the world and discover how our childhoods have made us all what we are today. Children have been called living messages we send to a time we will not see. And that's why we need to know as much as we can about this special time. Childhood.
Thursday at 8 p.m. on Valley Public Television. If you love the wildlife of this country, you won't want to miss the up-close visits of cinematographer Marty Stauffer and his series Wild America, Thursdays at 7 p.m. here on Channel 18.
Hi, I'm Jacques Pepin.
Watch Ghost Rider right here on this station. Get with the program.
See it Sundays at 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. on Valley Public Television.
Each week, detective novels come to life on Mystery on Channel 18. Join along as super sleuths solve crimes of the century. Chillers, thrillers, legitimate clues, and red herrings. They're all part of Mystery, Thursdays at 9 p.m. and repeating Saturdays at 9 p.m. here on Valley Public Television.
I'm Sue Houseman, and welcome to our program in Art of Sewing on I Love to Applique. And I'd like to introduce our guest today, Joyce Drexler. And Joyce is the creative director for Sulky of America. Welcome, Joyce.
Well, it's so wonderful to be here on Keep America Sewing. And today we're going to talk about applique, is that right?
Right. Are you going to enjoy that?
Yes.
And I know that you're here to be our expert on threads and some of the special stabilizers and fusing that we're going to be doing. So you're going to help us with that, right?
Yes, I'd like to share that information with you.
Well, the word applique actually came from the French to mean layer on. And that's just what we do in applique. We layer one layer on another and create some beautiful creative designs. And today what we're going to do is teach you the very, very basics and do the little sewing machine applique that Joyce and I are wearing on our chests. And
Isn't it adorable? I just love it.
Yeah. And so what we'd like to do first is talk about some of the basic information that you need to know. And I'm always first to talk about the sewing machine feet and how important using the right foot on your sewing machine is to the end result. And so I have 4 little presser feet down in front of me, and what I'd like you to do is to check out which foot you would use for applique. The first one is our standard presser foot, and underneath, the underside's really more important than the top on sewing machine feet. You'll see it's totally flat and feeds against the fabric as you sew a straight stitch or construct garments. But when we do applique, what we're going to be doing is building up a bead of stitching. And you can see that that actually makes a hump that we have to sew over. And if you use that flat foot, what can happen is that it will actually hang up on it or get caught, and you won't be able to get it as dense as you would like. So instead, we use what's called an applique foot or an embroidery foot or a tunnel foot or a special purpose foot, all kinds of different names. What they all mean is that they have a groove on the underside, and you can look under the feet to see what kind of groove. Now, I know Joyce's is the next one, the favorite one, the open-toed. This is also an applique foot that I'm sure you can get for your sewing machine that has the whole front of the toes cut out so that you can see really well. And you told me that's the only one you use, right?
I love it because I can maneuver so easily and I can see where I'm going. It's a must.
It's a must. Okay, but I do want to point out that on the bottom side, that one too has that tunnel to feed over. And then last I have our clear foot, which is nice for beginners because it has a little red line.
Yes, it's nice to be able to have a guideline to know how to line
Right.
something up on the edge.
So you can just line that line right up along where you want to sew. So those are the type of feet you look for. Go to your sewing machine attachments and see if you have one with a tunnel. Otherwise, ask your sewing machine dealer for one. Now, the other thing that I feel is so important for beautiful applique work is thread. Boy, the quality of the thread and the sheen. Tell us a little bit about what threads you recommend, Joyce.
Well, I like the new rayon sulky threads. They come in 2 different weights. They have a 30 weight, which is a heavier weight. That's just ideal for applique because it fills in readily. It's also good for monogramming and quilting because it fills in so nicely. Also for your satin stitch, decorative stitch machine type stitches on your sewing machine. Those will fill in so quickly with that heavier weight. And it comes in 47 colors. Now there's also a 40 weight type of sulky, which is really nice too. It's more of a utilitarian type of thread because it is a lighter weight thread. It can be used for any type of decorative work. And it comes in 193 colors, which makes it great for your applique processes.
So the 40 is finer.
Yes.
And the 30 is heavier.
Yes.
Okay.
And then there's also a metallic that's great for additions to different appliques. A little sparkle here
like
and there.
a sewing machine needle.
Right. Isn't that great?
Okay.
And there's also this little decorative stitching on here.
Sure.
And that's really a nice spark and addition to your applique that's really necessary sometimes.
And that glitz is so popular right now, too. And ready-mades. You can just imitate them ready-mades with the beautiful threads. Well, that's great. Now, what about the bobbin thread?
The bobbin thread is very important.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people and a lot of teachers recommend using the fine white thread on the bobbin. But don't you find, like I do, for most beginners especially, that to have matching bobbin thread is probably the best?
It's really ideal because then if your machine happens to bring up a little bit of the bobbin thread, you're going to find that it will match the top thread and you won't have a problem because some machines don't have the best tension set up in their applique processes.
Okay, so then we would want to use matching so it didn't pull up. What about color? That's something I've always been fussy about. I've got 2 sweatshirts down here in front and like to sort of illustrate what I'm talking about. For the beginner, I usually recommend that you stick with a color that matches your applique.
That's so much more forgiving that way.
If you go a little crooked or if you have a little problem, you're going to find that you'll have less mistake that you can see. But then once you're really experienced, if you want to call attention to the thread, then use a high contrast of thread and have a whole different look. Really, your creativity is just unlimited, isn't it?
It's just wonderful. Applique can be so much fun and there's just no limit.
Great. Well, I think we should get going now in the whole process of making this shirt. And I know the first thing we have to do is we have to get that sewing machine stuck on, right? So
yes.
I'm going to set those aside. Have any of you ever tried to do an applique when you've cut out like a little sewing machine and you've pinned it on and then you've tried to go around it and the edges were lifting and you had puckers when you got to the end? Anybody ever tried that? It's so hard to do. Well, let me just show you something. I'm going to take the pins out because they were there to fake you out. Because my applique sewing machine is all glued on or stuck on, and that's thanks to some of the new products that have been developed in the last few years that make applique so much easier than it used to be.
We have it so easy now.
I know, we really do. So what I'd like to share with you is that there are some products, and they're really called fusible webs. And what they are, they're like glue. Here's an example of one that's not on paper. It's called a fusible web, and if you use this one, you're going to have to use one of those transfer sheets, those Teflon sheets with it, or you'll have this all over your iron and your ironing board. But what's so great is that more recently they've actually taken this, I call it glue that's turned into fabric.
That's a good name for it. It really is.
Glue that's turned into fabric. And they've actually adhered it to paper. And you can buy it in lots of forms. Here's one type, and then it comes pre-packaged by lots of different manufacturers. But just ask for one of the fusible forms of material that you can put appliques down with. And so what we're going to do then is take that, and we're going to trace our design. Can I get you to trace our little design?
Yes, you can.
Okay, we've chosen the sewing machine because we love to sew, right?
Oh, yes.
And so we simply, let's talk about it for a minute.
Okay.
I've taken my piece and put the rough side up. Now, a lot of people teach a lot of different ways, but as you trace, I'm going to tell everybody why, because I have another piece in my hand here. And you can see this rough fusible that peels away from this release paper. Okay, the reason I like to do it with the rough side up is that then when you transfer it to your garment, it will be right side up. Now, some designs, it doesn't matter if they get backwards. A sewing machine, I have a little mistake one here, that actually if that were on my shirt, I would be a backward sewer, and so would you. So that's why we actually draw the design to the rough side of the fusible web. And that's what Joyce is doing for us now. Okay, great.
I'm almost done.
You're almost done. And actually use any kind of a permanent pencil or pen or marker that you can see. A lot of times I do it with just a pencil or a pen. But now we see we've transferred our design, right? Right out of our pattern book or coloring book or off a greeting card. You can get your designs anywhere.
There's just no end to where you can get them.
If you're a beginner, start with a pretty big design. They're easier to go around, and a pretty simple design, because that's a lot easier and you have a lot nicer finished result and you have practice. So let's go over to the ironing board now, and what we're going to do is show them how we actually fuse this piece, okay? So let's step over there, and I'll take this one with me. What I've done, I have on the ironing board my piece of calico that I'm going to be using, and this will be my actual little sewing machine. And I want you to notice that there are hearts on this that are right side up, so I have to keep and make sure.
A directional fabric, no doubt.
Yeah, directional fabric. Make sure my hearts. So we put it down on the ironing board with the wrong side up. And then this is really key. We put this fusible web down with the sticky or fusible side down. So the side we drew on is down, right? And so the paper side is up, and now we simply press. Don't iron, because when you iron, that actually kind of shushes it along. Just hold your iron in one place.
And what setting is the iron on?
Okay, my iron is basically on a cotton setting to get this fused really well.
And do you need to use steam with that?
Well, in this case, we don't use steam because we're on paper. And so the steam really wouldn't go through.
That's right.
But when we fuse this to the garment, we will use steam. But actually what would happen is our paper would block the steam and it would just kind of get a mess. So I'm not using steam while I'm doing this process. Okay, now the next step is really kind of an important one. You have to let it cool a minute. So what I'm going to do is I like to cut it with the paper on, because I can really keep rodding along then. So I'm going to ask you to cut that out, while it cools. And if you show everybody what you're doing, you're basically just going to cut around those black lines and cut out the sewing machine. Isn't this great? You're making iron-on applique. There was a day when we bought iron-on patches, right? I guess we could patch it. Does anybody no. While we're doing that, let's talk a little bit about stabilizers, because stabilizers are another very, very important part of the whole process of applique and of any directional and any kind of, decorative sewing that we do. And you'll see that what we have here is we have a real pretty little design on one side that we're going to do, but on the other side we have a big blob. And so as soon as Joyce gets that cut out, we're going to talk a little bit about the big blob on the wrong side of our fabric, because Joyce is really the authority on stabilizers.
All right, I think I have it now.
Okay, I'll take that from you if you will.
I think we want a rounded point.
I'll check that up, okay? And then tell me why, Joyce, on the back side of this, do we have this big blob?
Well, this big blob is actually an iron-on stabilizer that's going to protect our fabric as we stitch, that we won't have any tunneling or puckering resulting.
Okay.
And we do have 2 layers on this particular fabric because it's a lightweight knit. So we wanted extra stabilization.
Okay, so let's do that now. If you'll hold this one that we have finished, there is another stabilizer too that we might consider using, am I right?
Yes.
When we don't want it to show or when we're doing laces and things?
This is a water-soluble stabilizer, Solvay, which can also be ironed into 2 layers to make it a firmer type of stabilizer. This is also used for other things like cut work and open work too.
So anything where you have open work where you'd see the stabilizer, you might choose to use the Solvay. And basically to fuse that together, simply take several layers or 2 layers and use a press cloth and just, again, press.
Yeah, most people don't know that you can actually iron this water-soluble stabilizer. They think it'll just evaporate or something, but just don't use the steam.
I was gonna say, we won't use steam on this, right?
Right.
And we actually have fused net between there to make our own laces and things like that.
It's a
Isn't that
magic
amazing
product.
that
It's
we
just
can
magic.
just fuse that right together and have a really firm, sturdy.
And this will also not pull out your delicate straight stitches or any type of your lightweight decorative stitches that you might have.
Great. Okay, well, let's get going here and get our little sewing machine fused on. First, you hold this one. I'm going to do this all in one step. Got to do it fast here, and I think a lot of people appreciate those tips. There's our stabilizer. Whoops, and we've got our machine on the floor. And here's my top. Now, truthfully, placement is really important with applique.
It's so
Be
important.
careful where you put the applique. We wouldn't want a sewing machine on our stomach or, you know, in the wrong place on our body. What I like to suggest is that you actually pin the garment onto your garment you're wearing and stand in front of a mirror and pin the placement. And of course, center it up and be sure you've got it up near your face so that people can see how your face is really your best attraction, and keep it up near the face. So I'm going to lay the side of the actual stabilizer that sticks, which is the
shiny side,
side, okay, toward the wrong side of my garment.
Okay.
We're going to do this all in one step. And then I'm going to take the little sewing machine that you trimmed for me. This is always the hardest part for me, to get this started, to get the paper peeled off the back. But
you can put a little slit in it with your scissors, and it's a little easier to get off.
Good idea. Okay, so there you see, we don't need that paper one anymore. No. There you see we have a little iron-on sewing machine, and we're going to take time to get that centered up and in the middle of our garment and have all the wrinkles out of it. Now here's where we're going to use the steam. Of course, my iron has lots and lots of steam, you know, but I'm going to take and now just press that in place. I might give it an extra blast of steam.
And that's really important, isn't it, Sue?
To get that on there firmly, yes, because who knows, I might have to go around that and stitch it, right? That's going to be our next process.
Yeah, and this way it won't come away in the washing either.
And again, we press, we don't iron.
Right.
Okay? And so there are our, boy, how about that? Is that magic? Now, when we turn it over, we're going to be sure that we get that totally stable, all put in place really well, too. And this, we simply take and, now, I know if we get a ripple in this, this is one of the great things about it, we can just pull it up.
Yes.
And refuse it.
It's just a wonderful product. So many times with fusibles, you just have one shot at it and it's over. But with this, you could actually replace it up to 7 times.
And you can put multiple, up to 7?
Up to 7 times.
So you could use your scraps.
You wouldn't make that many mistakes.
I hope not. Never know. And I actually just put a second layer over that, so that we'd have a nice, firm, stable...
Yes, with this fine weight fabric, that's a good idea.
Okay, so now we're ready to sew, right? We might want to turn this over and give it one more little press from the right side and take this over. Now, we have our little elf, Patty Jo Larson, one of our Viking educators, at the sewing machine, and she's ready to do some stitching for us. So, Patty Jo, can we leave this one with you? And you're going to start stitching. Now, I mentioned the foot before, but now we're going to be setting up for a satin stitch applique. And I know that you simply touch the button and you have a satin stitch and everything's adjusted for you. But I know some of you don't have that advantage. At this point, you're working on a more basic machine. So what I'd like to do is go back over to the cutting table and we'll go through step by step while Patty Jo is sewing how to set up your machine for applique. So follow me over to the cutting table, okay? And I'm going to take off our little sewing machine cover. How about that? Another application for the same design. And what we're going to do, and by the way, design will be in the project book. And here you see a more basic. We've got the sulky thread, and we're going to first, on your sewing machine, set it for zigzag. Now, whatever you do, I'm going to turn my dial until I'm on the zigzag stitch. You may put a cam in your machine. However you get a zigzag, that's what you do first. Okay, the next step is to set the width of the stitch. And in truth, we want the width to be proportionate to the design we're sewing. Lots of people, when they start appliquing, they'll use their widest width because they think that, do you find that? I know, it's like a trait. They use this wide width, and so their little girl wears this little jumper with the heart on it, and the teacher looks at it and she goes, oh, your mother made that because it's got this big, wide zigzag. So use a width. We don't ever want anyone to guess that we made it, okay? We just want to tell them that we made it so they can think it's wonderful. But in truth, use a width proportionate to the design. And in this case, we've got about a 3 width on our sewing machine sweatshirt. So we would then set our width setting to the 3. Now you'll want to experiment on scraps, and you can experiment with your width. But the most important adjustment is the length, okay? The length adjustment is going to be down near a very short stitch length, almost to 0. Some of your machines will say fine, some of them will have a buttonhole setting, but we're going to turn it way, way down.
And you shouldn't be afraid to do that, because that's really what makes it look so satiny.
Right, and you can do that as you sew. I have a little sample. Always do a little mock-up sample, but you'll see that I started out and I was at a very long zigzag length, and as I shortened it and shortened it and shortened it, my stitch got closer and closer and closer because I was using that applique foot. And remember too, one other thing, and you'll notice that my satin stitch gets much nicer toward the end of my sample. Well, what I did, I reduced my upper thread tension slightly, and I reduced my presser foot pressure slightly. Now let me explain the difference. The tension, your threads, top and bobbin, are knotting, and when you have tension at normal, they knot at the edges of the fabric, okay? But when we want to applique, we can pull those knots underneath by setting our top tension a little bit lighter. So set your top tension number just like a half a number less, a little bit less, or if you have a dial, left is loose and right is tight. So set the...
Especially with these silky rayon threads, you're going to find that you do need a slightly looser tension, and also with the metallics.
Okay.
Much more so than with regular sewing thread.
So try a little looser tension. If you go too loose, it's just going to go so go down a little bit at a time, but that will give you a finer result, okay? And then in addition to that, you're going to want to reduce your pressure slightly. Now let's go back over and see how Patty Jo's going, okay? Because I know she's just working away there.
Yeah.
And Patty Jo, I think you're approaching an inside corner, am I right?
Yes.
Do you want to tell us what we do at the inside corner?
I'm using the clear B foot because I like to see that red line right along the edge of the applique. Most of the stitch is on the applique, and as I'm coming around this inside corner, that's the first time I'll actually stop stitching and pick up the foot a little bit to pivot. And when I stop stitching, I want the needle to be inside the applique, so I don't have an open V in the satin stitch.
Okay.
And then I'm coming to an outside corner, and as you could probably guess, when you stop with the needle down, let's have it on the outside of the shape when I pick up the foot.
So inside corners, stop with the needle on the inside, and outside, stop with it on the outside. And if you have needle stop down on your sewing machine, be sure and use that.
Oh, that's so nice.
Now, can we take that from you real quick?
I have one more tip to add. I heard you mentioning over there. With the adjustable presser foot pressure and this large of an open curve, you maybe don't even have to stop to pivot. How about if I turn my presser foot pressure a little bit lower than normal? I'll keep my hands in front of my work so I won't stretch out my stitch as I'm sewing. And as I come to this corner, I can actually just scoot around it without ever stopping.
That's great. You don't even have to
Being
raise
careful
up that
not to pull. Just scoot around the corner.
Okay.
That makes a much smoother look, too, when you scoot around like that.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. I know we're running a little short of time, so what I'd like to do is just tell everyone about our little heirloom applique heart, because that's such a wonderful tip. And you may have noticed that Joyce and I have a little heart on our sweatshirt. And the way we've done that is to make a little heart that turns right side out automatically. Let me lay it in place so they can see what it's going to look like on your little sewing machine. And the little heart quilt on the back wall was done this way. What we do first is to trace that heart with a marker onto salvie and then stitch around it. So we actually stitch around it, trim it with a pinking shear, slit the salvie, and turn it right side out. Can we take that one and show them? And you'll see now how that actually turned it right side out. Isn't that great?
And this is the look of hand applique.
Yeah, because then when we put it in place, we simply go around it with a little stitch that looks like hand applique. Now it's 8:36 for Patty Jo. She just touches the stitch, and the little straight stitches are on the outside of the heart. Okay, the little straight stitches are on the outside of the heart, and then the little stitch that jumps over catches on the heart. So it looks just like heirloom applique. Now, those of you that don't have a special stitch for that, what I'd suggest is that you use your blind hem stitch and shorten the length way up and narrow the width. And you can imitate that look. It won't be quite the same, but you can get very much that same look. Yeah, very much that same look. Okay, can we just pull that out and show it? Because we have a bunch of other beautiful samples and a quick project that we would like to show you, okay? But you see now how we've stitched part of that down. And of course, when this gets washed, that salvie actually just dissolves. And what's so great about that is that it's just like hand applique. It's wonderful. Well, we have Rhonda here with us today, too, and she's brought a bunch of beautiful applique samples that we'd like to share with you. And Rhonda, I know that you enjoy these, and these are so pretty, the little pencil or crayon appliques and the little quilt block applique, which is such fun. Isn't that great? And of course, then we have another one that's done in a metallic-y type fabric. When you use something like this, the bow with the metallic, don't use too satin a stitch. It actually cuts the fabric. And so you don't want to use too tight a stitch when you do that type of applique. And here was some heirloom scraps that we made into a hard applique with a satin stitch and the heirloom applique over it. So lots and lots of ideas. Isn't this fun?
Yes.
I mean, just lots of tips. And oh, speaking of that heirloom applique, look at this beautiful little flower.
Oh.
Yeah. And then the satin stitch leaves, really another wonderful, fun thing to do. And then, of course, this idea is one I really enjoy, taking the print of the skirt or the pants and actually appliquing that print to the top. This is how
be so much fun to do.
Like a designer outfit.
Sure.
I mean, something you'd go out and pay a fortune for, right? So that's just great. And then, of course, you see here that we have no applique at all. Simply the satin stitch stitched over the design of the fabric to kind of embellish it, again, up near the face to bring that eye up, which is really fun. Oh, and look at this. Look at you guys. Can we see your pockets? That's all I'll say. Look at those darling pockets. This is the I Love to Sew, Keep America Sewing jumper. And the little sewing machine for mom and the little sewing machine for daughter called Keep America Sewing on moms and Get America Sewing on daughters. Isn't that great? These were done by Barb Griffin for us. So let me pass that. And gee, we're so pleased that Rhonda brought those in for us to see. But we do have another quick project for you, just as we always do at the end of the program. And this is one of our favorites. It's the placemat apron. And you know the little heart, okay? The little heart that I mentioned that we put down. Isn't this fun?
This is so cute. I'm going to put mine on.
And what we're going to do is show you. Now, we're working on a sewing machine one, right? So will you tell us how to do this, Patty Jo?
This is so quick and easy. Just buy 2 placemats, and you might want to go with the ruffly one, or if you want to make a chef's apron or something, go with the straight placemats. Now what you do is overlap your 2 placemats, and that overlap becomes where the pocket is. So I've already got my sewing machine on this, and all I do to finish this apron is to stitch the 2 together, and it's ready to go.
Okay, so we stitched the little pocket in the round, right around following that outline of the placemat, and then that gives us the pocket, and on the squarer ones, we'd have a little square effect, right? And then just bar tack, or show us how you put those on with the cute little heart, More I Love to Sew.
The ribbon ties.
About 3 yards of ribbon would be what you'd need probably to do the little, maybe even a little less, 2.5, to do the little neck, and enough to go around your body. Well, some of us would need more. Yeah. We were thinking exactly the same thing. Some of us would need more than others to go up. Actually, if we made one of these for a very big man to be a cobbler apron or a tulle apron, we'd need a lot of ribbon, right? But that's our little apron project, and we sure hope that you have enjoyed seeing that. Joyce, I just really enjoyed hearing all that good information about threads and needles and everything. We didn't really talk about needles, but we suggest always a nice new needle, size 90 or 14 stretch for applique purposes. Thanks so much for being with us, and we're looking forward to having you with us again.
Oh, I'm just really looking forward to coming back.
Yeah, and thanks, Patty Jo, for that great project as well. This has been so much fun, and we have got so many great things to share with you over the next few weeks. Actually, our next program I think you're going to really enjoy. It's called How to Look Like Cher When You Feel Like Roseanne. And you're going to want to see that one?
I'm watch that
and we have another special guest who's going to be with us. So be sure and be here. Till next time, happy sewing.
Sue is offering a companion book to this Art of Sewing series. Step-by-step how-to project sheets are included for most of the garments, gifts, and crafts shown on the series. To order your copy, call 1-800-358-0001 or send $12.95 to Art of Sewing with Sue Hausman, Book 1, 11760 Berea Road, Cleveland, Ohio, 44111.
This is one way to save a premature baby. This is another. This is one way to treat cancer. And this is another. Modern medicine behind the scenes with George Lucas. Heroes, myths, and magic. You make it happen with the Force.
See it Tuesday, March 9th at 7 p.m. during Valley Public Television's Spring Festival.
Today's broadcast on Channel 18 is made possible in part by a grant from the City of Fresno Water Conservation Program. California Color, water-efficient landscapes, colorful with less water.